In the heart of the dense eastern jungle, amidst the brutality and chaos of the Vietnam War, a battle took place that would go down in history. This event would be seared into memory as one of the most decisive moments of the conflict. We're talking about the incident at Forward Operating Base 4, better known by its acronym FOB4, and the impressive ambush it suffered at the hands of the Viet Cong. Join us as we explore the events that led to this trap taking place, costing the United States military its most significant single-day casualty. Get ready to delve into a jungle full of dangers and ruthless enemies. Welcome to Military History. Before we tell you about the tragedy suffered by American soldiers, we believe you should know about the location where the trap unfolded, as well as the profile of the combatants who faced off in this challenge. We'll briefly develop this information so you can understand the true magnitude of the ambush. During the Vietnam War, an elite group operated under a veil of secrecy. This was the Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, Studies and Observations Group, better known as MACV-SOG. Forged in the crucible of unconventional warfare, these soldiers were the ghosts that haunted the jungle, executing high-risk missions that defied logic and altered the conditions of the battlefield. Established in 1964, it became the spearhead of US covert operations. Their tasks ranged from strategic reconnaissance in North Vietnam and Laos to the capture of prisoners and the rescue of downed pilots. They even ventured into hostile territory to free prisoners of war in bold liberation exercises. More than mere soldiers, MACV-SOG members were survival experts, demolition specialists, masters of stealth, and linguists fluent in the languages of Southeast Asia. Their training was brutal, forging an unbreakable brotherhood among those who dared to defy the impossible. Their actions were as varied as they were lethal. They participated in the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the trigger for US intervention in the war on a large scale. They were present in Operation Steel Tiger, the Tet Offensive, which we'll discuss later, and the Cambodian campaign, leaving an indelible mark on the course of the conflict. Psychological operations were also part of their arsenal, using propaganda and information warfare to undermine enemy morale and sow discord among their ranks. Known for their motto, audacity and professionalism, MACV-SOG individuals became legends. Their feats, shrouded in mystery, fueled the public's imagination and generated an aura of invincibility. As the operational site of this spectacular elite force, FOB4 was a key component in the network of military missions carried out by US Special Forces. Located in central Vietnam, near the border with Laos and Cambodia, this settlement stood as a bastion of resistance and determination amid the dense Vietnamese jungle. It was conceived as an advanced base for special forces, providing a strategic launching point for conducting covert missions and tactical operations in areas controlled by the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army. Its strategic location allowed US troops to project power in the region and conduct raids behind enemy lines. The construction and maintenance of FOB4 represented a significant logistical and operational challenge for US forces. Situated in a hostile and inaccessible environment, It required the construction of basic infrastructure such as airstrips, shelters, and warehouses to ensure effective functioning. In addition to serving as a launching pad for tactical operations, it also fulfilled command and control functions, coordinating the activities of units deployed in the area and serving as a center for communications and strategy. Its ability to maintain connectivity between deployed forces on the ground was crucial for the success of maneuvers in the region. This site was also the temporary home for hundreds of US soldiers who lived and worked in difficult and dangerous conditions. The base was constantly threatened by enemy attacks, requiring extreme vigilance and reinforced security measures to protect its personnel and equipment. Let's hear the testimony of a soldier speaking about the armament they had at their disposal.
Light anti-tank weapons. They'd never been used before against tanks. This was the first time in the history of the weapon that they were ever used. So we thought we were okay for a couple of tanks.
One of the main functions of FOB-4 was to serve as a launching platform for covert missions and tactical operations in enemy territory. These special forces conducted sabotage tasks and captured high-value targets. MACV-SOG units carried out aerial and ground reconnaissance missions in areas controlled by the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army. These activities provided them with crucial information about enemy troops and their movements, allowing for the planning and execution of actions with greater precision and effectiveness. In addition to covert operations, FOB-4 also played a crucial role in gathering and analyzing intelligence. Counterintelligence and reconnaissance units deployed at the base collected data on enemy activities. They also analyzed movement and behavioral patterns, providing real-time reports to operational forces in the field to design tactics and strategies aimed at dismantling Charlie, as Americans referred to their Asian opponents. Utilizing information gathered by intelligence units, U.S. forces planned and executed capture and elimination operations against enemy targets. In addition to its operational and intelligence functions, as mentioned earlier, FOB-4 also provided logistical and communication support to all forces deployed in the area. The base served as a distribution center for supplies and equipment, ensuring that units in the field had the necessary resources to carry out their missions effectively and safely. Testimonials from veterans who served in this stronghold highlight the importance of this location in the success of operations in the Eastern Territory. Soldiers praise the dedication and professionalism of their comrades in arms, who significantly contributed to the safety and well-being of the young men giving their lives for the cause supported by their country. However, the infallibility of this place and its specialized soldiers would face a night of nightmare.
The ground began to shake. When the next trip flare went off, they were under attack.
August 23, 1968, was a dark and humid night in the Vietnamese jungle as Viet Cong troops prepared to launch their surprise attack on Forward Operating Base 4. The moon barely managed to filter through the thick foliage of the trees, while the sound of jungle nightlife filled the air with an ominous buzz. It was the sound of war and death. Seizing the darkness to stealthily advance towards the American defenses, Charlie moved cautiously, prepared to kill. The Eastern guerrilla had been observing FOB-4 for days, gathering information on patrols and movements of American forces. They knew the time to strike was at night. Darkness provided them with perfect cover to launch their surprise assault against the base. Meanwhile, the American troops available on site were on high alert. They had received intelligence reports about the presence of the Viet Cong in the area and believed they were prepared to repel any enemy attack. Soldiers remained at their posts, weapons ready for combat, nerves generating maximum tension. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the violent sound of gunfire and explosions in the distance. The attack began with an intense barrage of mortars and rockets. Explosions illuminated the night and sowed chaos among the American and South Vietnamese soldiers defending the base. The Viet Cong had launched their assault, leveraging their knowledge of the jungle to advance swiftly towards FOB-4 and open fire on American defenses. The battle that ensued was fierce and chaotic. Violence reigned in the air, and the clamor of bullet casings bouncing on the ground echoed like death knells. Trained troops fought bravely to repel the enemy assault, firing from their fortified positions and hurling grenades at the Viet Cong ranks. The noise of explosions resonated in the jungle as bursts of shrapnel illuminated the darkness. It was a grotesque spectacle. Let's hear the testimony of one of the survivors. Despite the ferocity of the enemy attack, U.S. forces held their ground. They demonstrated time and again their bravery and determination, resisting the Viet Cong's attempts to take control of FOB-4 against all odds. It's worth noting that those holding the fortress were the best trained and most prepared troops in the American Army in the territory. Had they been less experienced soldiers, the enemy incursion would likely have been much more effective and swift. The battle raged on for hours, with both sides suffering significant losses in the process. Although the Viet Cong managed to inflict casualties on U.S. forces, they couldn't break through their defenses and were forced to retreat under heavy fire from the resistance's weapons. The consequences of the ambush were felt across the front lines. U.S. forces redoubled their efforts to protect FOB-4 and strengthen their defenses against future enemy attacks. At the same time, the Viet Cong suffered considerable losses in men and resources, undermining their ability to carry out such offensive operations in the region. It was clear that, despite being a bloody confrontation, both sides suffered the horrors of war equally. For this reason, the ambush at FOB-4 ended up being a decisive event in the Vietnam War. While the Viet Cong didn't manage to capture the base, the attack demonstrated the determination and combat capability of enemy forces. Furthermore, it served as a grim reminder of the dangers faced by U.S. troops in the Vietnamese jungle and the need to maintain constant vigilance at all times. This incursion greatly affected the morale of U.S. troops. The war already had little popular support, with most Americans considering it a mistake to participate in a conflict that didn't directly affect their country's interests. They saw it as a political conflict, and many watched their young sons, brothers, or partners go to die for something that didn't quite make sense. This ambush symbolized that idea to some extent. Being in the middle of the Vietnamese jungle, relentlessly besieged by enemy bullets due to an unfounded decision by the president, was more than soldiers could bear. But that wasn't the only event that would deeply mark this story. A few months earlier, the Tet Offensive would be set in motion. It was dawn on January 31, 1968. An expectant silence hung over South Vietnam. Suddenly, the roar of explosions and the thunder of machine guns shattered the stillness. Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces, in a coordinated and audacious invasion, had launched a simultaneous attack on over 100 American cities and military outposts. it was the beginning of the siege. Tet, or the Vietnamese New Year, was supposed to be a time of peace and ceasefire. US and South Vietnamese soldiers, confident in the military superiority of their side, were getting ready to celebrate. However, the enemy had other plans. Taking advantage of the festivities, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army attacked fiercely, catching the Allied forces by surprise. The battle for Hue, the ancient imperial city, became one of the bloodiest episodes of the Tet Offensive. For weeks, Vietnamese forces entrenched themselves in the city, waging a fierce house-to-house resistance. US Marines, sent to regain control, faced a fierce struggle where every alley became a battlefield. The Tet Offensive, though ultimately quelled by Allied forces, had a profound impact on the war. Images of destruction and American casualties, broadcasted on television worldwide, sparked strong anti-war sentiment in the American public that also led to the ambush at FOB 4 months later. Confidence in victory, which had until then been unquestionable, began to erode. President Lyndon B. Johnson, pressured by the public and aware of the growing human and economic cost of the war, announced he would not seek re-election. The Tet Offensive had shown that victory would not be easy or quick, and that the American people were not willing to endure an endless conflict.
What I see when I look at that photo today are 7, 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, badly wounded. It's painful to look at.
The repercussions of this event extended beyond the battlefield. The Vietnam War became a symbol of imperial arrogance and the futility of foreign military intervention. The anti-war movement gained strength worldwide, inspiring new generations to fight for peace and justice. Despite its military outcome, this milestone marked a symbolic victory for the Viet Cong and North Vietnam. It demonstrated their organization and resilience and exposed the weaknesses of the US strategy. From that moment on, the war began to tilt in favor of communist forces, ultimately culminating in the fall of Saigon in 1975. The Viet Cong's incursion came at a high cost. 32 of their soldiers died in battle. On the side of the MACV-SOG Special Forces, 17 of their men lost their lives, the highest single-day casualty toll in American military history. This demonstrates that even the most prepared troops cannot always prevail against the ferocity of battle and an army willing to do anything to fight for a cause, defending their land. Only a tree or bush could hide an enemy ready to annihilate them. Ambushes were the order of the day, and they always ended in a shower of blood for both sides. In this new installment of military history, we're going to reconstruct in great detail 3 important offensives carried out by the Viet Cong. A series of surprise attacks in which the powerful United States Army was totally humiliated by local guerrillas. Put on your bulletproof vest, grab your M16, and let's get started. Although the official activities of the United States Army in Vietnam began a few years later, a Special Operations Commando Group was established in the Southeast Asian nation in 1964. This was the MACV-SOG, a unit composed of elements of the Navy SEALs, Marines, and members of Special Forces. During its 8 years of activity between 1964 and 1972, MACV-SOG carried out high-risk missions that, despite their importance, were not reported to the general public. In order to operate and keep its structure secret, the group was divided into 3 geographically delimited subcommands: the Northern Command and Control, or CCN, the Central Command and Control, or CCC, and the namesake Southern Command, also called CCS. It was at one of the most important bases in the northern section that the Viet Cong carried out one of the most brutal attacks on the Western invader, in a day that will remain forever in the memories of those who survived. Next, we will listen to the memoirs of John Stryker Meyer, one of the most recognized veterans of the legendary MACV-SOG.
During that attack, it came after midnight. It was a moonless night, and the sappers, who were highly trained NBA soldiers, hit the base.
FOB-4, or Forward Operations Base, was a top-secret operational headquarters of enormous importance to Washington. Its role was fundamental for the organization of missions in one of the most conflictive areas of Vietnam, which is why Green Berets and other top-level commandos who cooperated with MACV-SOG were often housed there. The problem was that the flow of activities was very high, and the base was not always guarded with the same solidity. There were brief windows in which FOB-4 was susceptible to a massive attack, and the Vietnamese knew it. For this offensive, the Communist Front employed the infamous sappers, its special forces soldiers trained to give their lives no matter the conditions. During the war, their reputation was cemented through brutal sacrifices. The sappers were fanatical communists willing to do anything, recapturing the fighting spirit of the old kamikazes of Imperial Japan. Such was their determination for their land that they wore a white bandana on their forehead with the words, "We came here to die," written in blood. On the morning of August 23, 1968, a Viet Cong battalion made up of sappers and regular soldiers entered FOB-4. Their strategy had been considered down to the last detail, so much so that the offensive coincided with the night when the new lunar cycle began. This ensured total darkness for them to move like hunters throughout the Vietnamese jungle. News of the attack spread little by little as shots and explosions echoed in every corner of the territory. Let's listen to veteran Gene Pugh tell what it was like to cross the camp in the middle of a hail of enemy gunfire.
And I hear is bang, bang. Got you, son of a bitch. And then the next breath, I'm hit, I'm hit, I'm hit. So I go out and start dragging him into the barracks. And I could feel the bullets going by my bare torso and snapping right next to my ear. It's an experience that you just wish that they could hit you instead of feeling it that way.
The Spike Team Rattler reconnaissance team was stationed at the top of the Marble Mountains, one of the highest places in Da Nang. The MACV-SOG commandos were enjoying a peaceful night when suddenly a series of rumblings turned the moment into a nightmare. Below, several meters from their positions, the Viet Cong battalion had penetrated the scarce defenses, starting a real massacre. Within minutes, FOB-4 was transformed into a bonfire filled with US corpses. Only a few structures survived the offensive. While the members of the aforementioned Spike Team Rattler reconnaissance team observed all the horror from above, a part of the Vietnamese squad was preparing to ambush them. The sappers used ropes to climb in a few minutes, taking their victims completely by surprise. By the time the climbing team managed to surround Spike Team Rattler, the situation at the entire FOB-4 base had become a true hell on earth. There were tents on fire, lifeless bodies on the ground, and blood mixed with mud and vegetation. In this chaos, North Vietnamese troops ran carrying assault rifles. In one of the most shocking situations, a group of sappers with explosives attached to their bodies ran into the base's ammunition depot. Within seconds, an explosion ended their lives in the weapons reserve of FOB-4. Imagine seeing with your own eyes how a completely deranged enemy soldier runs towards an explosives depot, sacrificing his life to leave you without weapons. This type of kamikaze attack ended up becoming something characteristic during North Vietnamese ambushes. The sappers entered with dynamite or bombs on their bodies to destroy US bunkers and strategic positions. As the first rays of the sun illuminated the base, the Viet Cong troops retreated, leaving only devastation behind. Among the ruins of what had been an important American military post, the bodies of 17 Green Berets were found, as well as dozens of wounded, some seriously. Due to the top-secret nature of their work, the eliminated Americans did not have an official funeral service in Southeast Asia. The next ambush we will discuss was not carried out against elite units, but against Marines operating on the banks of the Angon River on the morning of October 17, 1967. During the first months of 1967, the Vietnamese front suffered the loss of thousands of soldiers as a result of the so-called search and destroy missions carried out by the United States Army. But General Tran Van Tra suggested that the communist troops could still achieve victory if they managed to inflict heavy losses on the Americans. That is why, in mid-1967, the 7th and 9th Divisions of the North Vietnamese Army began to plan what would be one of their most brutal and effective offensives. The Angon River runs through a forested region with lots of vegetation, making it an ideal place to hide. With that in mind, on October 16, 1967, a patrol of soldiers from Alpha Company was sent to survey the region. During their mission, they encountered a small enemy unit, which escaped after a brief firefight. Upon reporting this encounter, Uncle Sam's men received a specific order. They were to find this group of Vietnamese and annihilate them. Part of the plan was for them to advance through occupied territory. Upon finding Vietcong settlements, they were to contact the artillery batteries waiting a few miles away. The problem was that the local warriors had already noticed the plan and were waiting for the right moment to attack, like a predator watching its prey. One of the American soldiers did not have a good feeling about the operation.
Well, they told us we were going to a place that was going to be pretty rough, and that's all. They didn't tell us what was waiting on us. You had no choice, you just went.
At around 10 a.m. on October 17, 1967, American soldiers encountered Viet Cong troops. As we anticipated, the Asians were waiting in bunkers scattered in strategic areas of the jungle, surrounding the path along which their rival was advancing. When the Americans came within range, chaos broke out. A storm of rifle cartridges, machine guns, and grenades erupted in a deadly ambush. Washington's troops had no time to take up defensive positions and suffered massive losses of personnel during the first minutes of combat. Viet Cong men came from all sides, taking advantage of their bunkers and the geography they knew so well. As the North Vietnamese fire increased, the American soldiers thought they heard the distinctive sound of an M60 machine gun. The men assumed it was cavalry that had come to rescue them, so they ceased fire for fear of hitting one of their own. The Asian front took full advantage of this moment of weakness. At about 11:30 a.m., they sent in reserves of Vietnamese personnel who were waiting for the right moment to act. To make matters worse for the Americans, it was impossible to use artillery, as the proximity of their own to their enemies made it too risky.
Alpha Company disappeared. And now the firing was directed against us, against Delta Company.
Lúc đó thì trung đoàn mới tung cái tiểu đoàn 2 là tiểu đoàn dự bị trong ngày, đánh từ sườn bên phải đánh sang đội hình của địch.
At the same time as this part of the offensive, another group of Asian troops had advanced stealthily to the vicinity of the artillery. When the time came, they pounced on the enemy, further complicating the support that the rest of the Americans ambushed in the Ong Thon region could receive. The members of that artillery battalion remember how chaotic that situation was. On the one hand, they had to coordinate the shots and receive information from the soldiers who were further ahead. On the other, they had to defend themselves from the waves of Vietnamese who tried to take over the position. What better way to listen to North Vietnamese Colonel Vo Minh Triet describing the strategy used by his men.
Anh tiểu đoàn cũng có cái đài quan sát của anh, rồi anh trung đoàn có cái đài quan sát của anh, tức là những cái đài leo lên trên cao. Các cái bộ đàm này có trực đầy đủ không mới gọi. Cứ để cho đổ xuống rừng, khi kéo vào đến một cái tầm là nổ súng rồi.
One of the artillery observers, that is, those men in charge of surveying the landscape and translating it into concrete data for launching attacks, was Lieutenant Harold Pinky Durham. He was an experienced soldier who was on his second tour in Vietnam. He adopted a dangerous position, exposing himself to hostile fire coming from several directions, but it was necessary so that he could communicate with the rest of the troops and coordinate the artillery attacks. Durham calmly and quietly carried out his work, providing precise coordinates that managed to blow up several Vietnamese positions. Unfortunately, during combat, the brave soldier stepped on a Claymore-type mine, which does not explode, but does launch hundreds of metal pieces that pierce the victim's body. Durham suffered very serious injuries, and due to that incident, he was left blind in one of his eyes. With his vision flooded with blood and his body lacerated, the lieutenant continued to operate effectively, providing coordinates by radio even when the bullets grazed his head. Thanks to this man's sacrifice, North Vietnamese forces were unable to complete their massacre as they could no longer advance on the soldiers who had been ambushed further ahead. On that fateful day in October, Durham saved hundreds of lives. Listen to the description of Captain Carl Kaiser, who was part of the engagement and survived to reconstruct the initial events.
And one of the members of the flank security reported hearing movement and hearing a metallic click on his right flank. At that time, a machine gun opened fire on the right file of the 1st Platoon of Alpha Company.
That's the first shots that were heard.
That's correct.
As the American troops managed to organize and regain ground, the Viet Cong soldiers began to retreat. The bulk of the Asian column ceased hostilities and left the area about 2 hours after the hell began. They could return home satisfied, having more than fulfilled their mission, as they managed to inflict brutal damage on the American ranks. In total, Ong Than's offensive claimed the lives of 56 Washington soldiers. Another 75 were wounded, and 2 remain missing to this day. Among the dead was the heroic Harold Durham, who received the legendary Medal of Honor posthumously for his dedication and sacrifice to ensure the survival of his comrades. The Vietnam War was brutal, but it is precisely in these extreme conditions that heroism and military ability flourish. That is why the last ambush that we will review in this video also has a recipient of the legendary Medal of Honor as a participant. Let's put ourselves in time and space. On August 25, 1968, members of the American 48th Transport Group were carrying out their important job, transporting supplies to prevent soldiers from starving to death. On that day, the convoy was particularly large, with a total of 81 trucks that left the town of Long Binh loaded with food, fuel, and weapons. As you can imagine, the roads that connected Vietnam at that time were not exactly gems of modern engineering. Quite the opposite, they were winding and precarious roads that linked the starting point to Saigon, the final destination of the 48th Transport Group. Around noon, the convoy entered the village of Apnei, a small rubber tree plantation that stretched along the only passable road. There was a column of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, the southern front that allied itself with the United States. Their presence was something to be expected, since these troops collaborated with the pacification of communities like the one they were passing through. Within a few minutes, the convoy already occupied the entire extension of the village. When the first trucks began to leave Apnei, the presumed soldiers, friends of Uncle Sam, revealed their true identity. They were Viet Cong men, armed to the teeth to rid the drivers and elements of the 48th Transport Group. Not only did they have surprise on their side, but the Asians had posted snipers on both sides of the road, placing all the American vehicles in the deadly zone, the most vulnerable part in an ambush. The Battle of Apnei was not limited to gunfire. The communist soldiers also used machine guns and RPG-7 launchers to destroy the vehicles. The primary objective was to cut off the supply of provisions and, if possible, capture some of the loot to feed the Viet Cong with weapons and food. After spraying the trucks carrying food with bullets, the attackers' fury focused on the fuel tankers, waiting for them to explode and completely block the convoy's advance. In this part of the story, we will meet the great hero who emerged in the midst of this chaos. William Seay was a truck driver of only 19 years old. Thanks to his skills behind the wheel, he became a member of the transport company, but that did not mean he did not know how to fight. When the shooting broke out in Apnei, the boy jumped out of his vehicle and looked for the rest of his companions to organize the response. In an ambush, it is essential to stay calm and act by listening to your head, not the fear roaring in your stomach. Seay and other drivers positioned themselves 6 meters away from each other, adopting a defensive position to repel the first attack of the Vietnamese soldiers. The boy opened fire and killed 2 enemies who were about 10 meters away. Meanwhile, one of his companions managed to eliminate a Viet Cong soldier, but then his M16 jammed and was unusable. However, the death of the 3 communists scared away a small group of guerrillas who were approaching the trucks. William Seay played a prominent role in protecting his comrades at Apnei. First, he fearlessly threw hand grenades that drove the enemy back. The North Vietnamese assumed there were several men, but it was just Seay holding his own. During this time, the boy was shot in the wrist and bled out throughout the day. Still, he managed to drag several wounded comrades to safety under a hail of enemy shells. It is hard to imagine the bravery and resolve it takes to repeatedly expose yourself to painful death to save others. It was for this, as well as for eliminating several Viet Cong soldiers, that William received the Medal of Honor. Unfortunately, the 19-year-old ended up dying from multiple wounds that caused massive blood loss. The ambush was incredibly long, with intermittent hostilities that extended over 9 hours of that infamous August 25th. This gave enough time for the US Air Force and artillery to show up, showering the communist guerrillas with fire and destruction. Finally, at 9 p.m., a large infantry unit arrived to assist the rear of the convoy. Seeing themselves outnumbered, the North Vietnamese retreated into the jungle. In total, 30 Americans died, 45 were wounded, and 2 were taken prisoner, making this episode one of the deadliest of the entire conflict. Throughout this installment, it became clear that material or numerical superiority are not always the most powerful cards. Ambushes and surprise attacks can be a deadly tool that balances the scales. The United States learned this the hard way during its intervention in Vietnam. By the mid-1960s, the war unleashed in Vietnam against communism was yielding devastating results for both sides. The strategy adopted by the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, under the leadership of General William Westmoreland between 1964 and 1968, focused on a simple yet brutal premise: to kill more. The tactic of accumulating enemy casualties as a measure of success in the war was based on the belief that by significantly weakening the adversary, their fighting capacity would erode, ensuring victory. However, in the case of the Vietnam War, this tactic proved ineffective for several reasons. Firstly, the conflict was not limited to a conventional military confrontation, but also involved a complex political and social framework. Secondly, the Viet Cong guerrillas and the North Vietnamese Army enjoyed widespread popular support in many areas of the South, making it difficult to eradicate communism through military force alone. The guerrilla response to the tactic of accumulating casualties was nothing short of a relentless wave of deadly traps and ambushes. These tactics, employed by both the Viet Cong guerrillas and American forces, unleashed a brutal and merciless struggle in the jungle. Are you ready to delve into this tale of terror and bravery? Every trail could become a deadly trap, with booby traps, landmines, or napalm bombs waiting to detonate right before your eyes. Join us in the next military history video where we will unveil the most ferocious ambush tactics that made the Vietnam War one of the bloodiest in history. Let's go into the Vietnamese jungle. The enemy that the Americans encountered was formidable. The Viet Cong, formerly known as the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam, emerged as a powerful communist guerrilla force during the war. Composed primarily of insurgents from the South, they confronted the US-backed government in their struggle to unify the country under a communist regime. Employing meticulously orchestrated guerrilla tactics, the group challenged established military conventions and exploited the dense jungle terrain to launch devastating surprise attacks. Traps became an essential tool of their strategy, serving both as physical and psychological weapons. Punji stakes, simple in design yet deadly effective, consisted of sharpened bamboo sticks concealed under dense vegetation, often poisoned to ensure severe infections for those who fell into them. More elaborate board traps leveraged foot pressure on wood to trigger mechanisms that launched stakes or nails towards unsuspecting soldiers. Everything could conceal a grenade or an anti-personnel mine. Even bridges designed to collapse under the weight of those crossing hid punji stakes in their depths, ready to injure uniformed personnel falling into the water. Additionally, side-closing traps, ingenious in their conception, ensnared soldiers' legs between nail-filled boards, causing debilitating wounds and sowing chaos among enemy ranks. Each deception, however rudimentary it may seem, testified to the Viet Cong's deep knowledge of their environment and their ability to adapt to it. This skill to turn natural resources into lethal weapons not only compensated for the guerrilla group's disadvantage in weaponry and technology, but also played a crucial role in their resistance against the world's most powerful military force. Moreover, the insurgents deployed an invisible terror that deeply affected the minds of American soldiers, surpassing the mere physical threat they posed. This constant fear of the unknown, of making a misstep and triggering a deadly trap, generated a state of paranoia that permeated every jungle patrol. Soldiers moved with extreme caution, aware that the ground beneath their feet could transform into their worst enemy at any moment. The troops' psyche was severely impacted, as the anticipation of omnipresent yet invisible danger undermined morale and weakened combat effectiveness. During the first phase of the conflict in Vietnam, known as the War of Attrition, the search and destroy tactic became the modus operandi. This maneuver involved locating enemy units in the dense jungle, engaging them in combat, bombing them, and then returning to secure zones. It turned out to be a true ordeal, as locating and exterminating the enemy on their own turf was extremely challenging. Despite expecting a quick and decisive victory, the conflict became a nightmare for the American youth, engaged in an increasingly difficult and questionable endeavor. The search and destroy operations not only faced relentless resistance, but also caused physical and emotional strain on the soldiers involved. The impenetrable jungle, hostile climate, and guerrilla tactics further complicated the situation, turning each maneuver into a test of endurance and determination. As the war dragged on and American casualties mounted, questions arose about the effectiveness and morality of the adopted strategy. The previous experience in the Pacific during World War II, where the United States faced jungle warfare, hidden enemies, and ambushes, proved less useful in Vietnam. While in the Pacific, the goals were clear and tangible, such as not yielding any islands, reclaiming territory, and expelling the Japanese. In Vietnam, the objectives tended to blur. The fighting unfolded in a confusing setting with no clear advancements, engaging in combat from village to village in the jungle. The search and destroy strategy led by General Westmoreland was complemented by the brutality of Operation Rolling Thunder, which extended from March 1965 until the Tet Offensive 3 years later. This operation constituted a large-scale ambush where the U.S. Air Force systematically bombed North Vietnam with B-52 napalm bombs, causing massive destruction and leaving a profound psychological impact on the civilian population. Although napalm proved useful for attritional warfare, destroying shelters, tunnels, and trenches hidden underground, as well as instilling fear in the population, Westmoreland's strategy was increasingly trapped in an exchange of corpses. The planned devastation in Vietnam aimed to demoralize the communists, both psychologically and physically. But paradoxically, it became unbearable in the United States, despite the disproportion in casualties between both sides. American democracy could not tolerate such a massacre. Protests were inevitable. On the other hand, Ho Chi Minh's regime spread the narrative that their nation was waging a national liberation war against a foreign invader. From Hanoi, the Vietnamese dictator coordinated actions between the Communist Army and the Viet Cong guerrillas, providing them with logistical support, supplies, new recruits, and weapons. Despite the U.S. Army winning most battles and driving out the guerrillas, they continued to replace their fighters and regain influence in rural areas. American troops found themselves increasingly trapped in an endless labyrinth. Despite overwhelming resource disparity, with the United States deploying advanced technology and formidable arsenals, the Viet Cong responded with deep knowledge of the terrain and cunning, lethal guerrilla tactics. In this challenging scenario, survival and cunning often overshadowed conventional armament superiority. On May 15, 1964, an American battalion-sized detachment fell victim to a devastating Viet Cong ambush. The consequences of the clash were catastrophic, with 60 U.S. troops confirmed dead, 65 wounded, and a staggering total of 135 missing. Casualties like these, in a single day, had not been seen even in the worst moments of World War II. The ambush took place approximately 45 miles southwest of Saigon, in the Mekong Delta province of Kien Hoa, an area increasingly infiltrated by insurgents. According to military intelligence, the guerrilla force involved in the ambush consisted of 2 battalions totaling 800 men. On the other hand, the exact size of the U.S. government squad was difficult to determine, with estimates ranging between 250 and 350 troops. It is worth noting that the American Army included elite units known as Rangers, in addition to regular infantry. These forces were tasked with assisting 2 other companies in pursuing attackers who had previously assaulted a nearby outpost. However, the American troops inadvertently fell into the trap, as recounted by one of the survivors.
The terrain was covered with immense, thick vegetation. And so they had an opportunity to hide until the last minute, which was why a favorite tactic of theirs was the ambush.
The ambush exposed a clear weakness in American counterinsurgency tactics, highlighting a critical gap in their ability to effectively respond to such situations. The Viet Cong had repeatedly used surprise attacks throughout the country with devastating effectiveness, leveraging elements of surprise, camouflage, and speed of attack to achieve success. Unlike frontal engagements where prior planning or air support could be utilized, ambushes offered few opportunities for U.S. forces to call in reinforcements or airstrikes. Just days later, on May 22, 1964, Bravo Company of the 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, departed from Yankee Station eastward along the southern edge of the trace. Their mission was to clear enemy troops east of Route 561. However, after advancing about 400 meters, they fell into an L-shaped ambush set by a unit of the Vietnamese Army. The ambush triggered a devastating barrage of machine gun fire, mortars, and grenades, causing numerous casualties within the first 20 minutes of the battle. Captain Harris, the leader of Bravo Company, died in the confrontation but was credited with maintaining order and discipline, which prevented even greater casualties. For 4 consecutive years, the war escalated, and although Vietnamese casualties multiplied, the American Army, due to the sudden ambushes, became increasingly weakened, physically, psychologically, and morally. By August 25, 1968, amid the monsoon season in Vietnam, a large resupply convoy consisting of 81 trucks from the 48th Transportation Group departed Long Binh, bound for the 1st Brigade, 25th Infantry Division, located near the Cambodian border. Despite adverse weather conditions and warnings of possible enemy attacks, the convoy set out. As they moved along the potholed roads, the trucks were divided into 3 series, with refrigerated vehicles at the front, followed by cargo, fuel, and ammunition vehicles at the rear. Normally, the journey would take a few hours, but the convoy moved at a limited speed of 20 miles per hour due to terrain conditions. The 1st and 3rd Brigades of the 25th Infantry Division typically provided security along the main supply route. But the 3rd Brigade had been diverted to Saigon on orders from the new division commander, Brigadier General Ellis W. Williamson. With only 8 armed military police vehicles to protect the convoy's 81 vehicles, the risk was high. At 11:45 a.m., the convoy passed through the quiet town of Apnei. A column of soldiers from the Army of the Republic of Vietnam marched on the north side of the road, next to the rubber plantation known as Little Rubber. However, these soldiers turned out to be members of the Viet Cong. Suddenly, the guerrillas opened fire. Elements of the North Vietnamese Army's 88th Regiment, who had infiltrated Little Rubber the previous night, also joined the attack. The ambush was intense and well coordinated. The convoy soldiers attempted to defend themselves, but the enemy outnumbered them and was well prepared. They fired rockets, machine guns, and automatic weapons at the vehicles, causing chaos and destruction. Some trucks were hit and began to burn, while others were trapped on the blocked road. Drivers and soldiers who managed to get out of their vehicles took defensive positions, using whatever they could find for cover. However, the situation was desperate. The ambush had been meticulously planned, and the enemy had exploited the lack of security and bad weather to launch a devastating attack. Communications were difficult, and air and artillery support were out of reach. The soldiers faced an unequal struggle as the enemy continued their relentless assault. Before the increase of American troops in the mid-1965 war, it was evident that territorial victory belonged to the guerrillas. However, as offensive operations intensified, the enemy could no longer operate under cover of darkness with impunity. During the night of June 18, 1967, 10 infantry soldiers from the US 196th Light Infantry Brigade set up an ambush 16 kilometers south of Chu Lai in Quang Ngai Province as part of Task Force Oregon's efforts to secure the base complex of that strategic city. Led by 2nd Lieutenant Truman P. Sullivan and Sergeant Lloyd E. Jones, the squad prepared to surprise assault enemy terrorists operating in the area. The location was strategically chosen near two villages, Phuoc 1 and Phuoc 2, where local Viet Cong had been causing terror. The squad, under Sergeant Jones's leadership, was well equipped and prepared for the mission, carrying rifles, grenades, and other necessary equipment. Positioned in 4, the group established security forces on the east and right flanks, with Sergeant Nobles leading the latter. Command led by Jones oversaw the operation from the center. As night fell, the squad patiently awaited the enemy's approach. When 6 Viet Cong soldiers rushed into the trap, the Americans acted swiftly. Jones detonated a claymore mine, instantly eliminating 1 enemy Vietnamese. The squad then confronted the rest of the Viet Cong with gunfire and grenades. Despite sporadic fire, the elite team maintained control of the situation. With the mission accomplished and 2 soldiers wounded, Sergeant Jones ordered a retreat from the trap site to avoid possible guerrilla reinforcements. The squad returned to the base camp without further incidents, effectively countering the threat in the area. Since that last assault, the war continued its bloody course without major developments, except for the My Lai massacre on March 16, 1968. Despite the government and military's efforts to maintain public support and the narrative of a just and necessary war, reports of atrocities committed in My Lai undermined any argument in favor of military intervention in Vietnam. On this tragic day, American soldiers from the United States Army, under the command of Lieutenant William Calley Jr., entered the village of My Lai in Quang Ngai Province and perpetrated an indiscriminate massacre of civilians, including women, children, and the elderly. The operation was triggered under the mistaken belief that the village harbored Viet Cong members. However, the soldiers encountered no resistance and proceeded to massacre over 500 unarmed civilians. This act of atrocious brutality not only shocked the world, but also led many soldiers to confront deep ethical and moral dilemmas. The soldiers knew they were fighting a war without popular support.
And I understand that it was an unpopular war. But the guys that went there, even if they were drafted, boy, they fully believed in coming out of there alive. They fully believed in what they were doing. And yes, we were probably seeing on the other side of the political battle there, we had to believe that we could win that war.
Although some veterans may have maintained a more traditional view of heroism and duty during the conflict, for many others, the experience of My Lai and other similar atrocities shed light on the moral complexity of war. Ultimately, the withdrawal of American troops in 1973 and the fall of Saigon in 1975 marked the end of a long and costly offensive that left a legacy of suffering and division on both sides. Ambushes, with their ability to level the playing field between a conventional army and a guerrilla force, stood out as an effective tactic that challenged conventional combat strategies. Beyond their military impact, they represented the resistance of a determined people defending their land and independence. That concludes the video. If this report on the Vietnam War has intrigued you, we encourage you to subscribe to receive similar content in future editions of Military History.